Once again, I would like to extend a warm welcome who is joining us here today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tuğba Koç Baydar. I'm assistant professor in the Department of Islamic Law in Ibn Khaldun University. And thank you so much for joining us for the second session of today's panel titled. Oh, I don't have it. Yes, self-development. And so first, the first speaker will be Dr. Fahad Khan. And before his speech, I will introduce him a little bit. So Dr. Fahad Khan is a clinical psychologist with a doctorate in clinical psychology and a master degree in biomedical science. He is also Hafiz of Quran, mashallah, and has studied Islamic studies with various scholars in the Muslim world and the US. He is currently a student at Darul Qasim, continuing his Arabic and Islamic studies under the supervision of Sheikh Emin Huwailida. And he is a faculty member at Concordia University Chicago and College of DuPont. And he has conducted numerous research studies and has published book chapters and articles on traditional Islamically integrated psychotherapy and help-seeking attitudes of Muslim Americans, as well as the effects of religiosity on psychological distress. He is a fellow of the International Association of the Islamic Psychology and serves as editor for the Journal of Muslim Mental Health. Title of his speech, Conceptualization of Anger and Its Management by What? That's not yours? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, they wrote like that. That will be good to talk about. Okay, so it is written mistake. There's a mistake. So his title of the speech: Self-Control Based on Iqbal's work Asrar. That's very interesting. Okay, Dr. Fahad, the floor is yours.
رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Jazakumullah khair for İSAR and Adab for having a beautiful program, Dr. Tuba for introducing me. So for anyone who knows me, knows that even if the speech is not about Allama Iqbal sneaks into my speeches, because truly, Allama Iqbal writes in the introduction of Asrar-e-Khudi that he was under a lot of distress and hopelessness, and he found comfort through his sheikh, which was Mawlana Rumi. And if you go to the Mazar of Mawlana Rumi in Kunya, you will find a honorary grave of Allama Iqbal there as well. And so he gave him a lot of respect and love. And when I was going through my distressing times in my life, I found help through Allama Iqbal. I found that Muhammad Iqbal, rahimahullah, was speaking to me at every point in my life. So naturally, when I finished my degree and as I was working towards, I was reading and looking at how to conceptualize Allama's work in a psychological manner. So the first thing is we have to recognize, and Allama has a very interesting relationship with Nietzsche. He calls Nietzsche Majzub Farangi. He was Majzub, but he was a Westerner who didn't understand how to integrate religion and the role of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said he got to La, but then La ilah, but then he couldn't continue after that. It's interesting because in his poems, Iqbal will say, he first says that I wish Mujaddid al-Fisani was there to take Nietzsche and take him and show him the path. But later, Iqbal himself says that if that Majzub Farangi existed in my time, then Iqbal would have shown him what the maqam of Kibriya is. Right? So he had that. And I like to call Iqbal a theosopher because the word theosophy is, can be used in various different ways, but generally people who maintain and develop the knowledge of God within their philosophical realms. And that Iqbal's whole work is centered around this idea of relationship with Allah and Khudi. When he was asked about Khudi, how did you come up with the concept? He pointed to the verse of the Quran, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. Don't be like those who forgot Allah, and Allah made them forget themselves. And those were the real losers. In this line that I quote here, it's from a poem of Iqbal, which is called Lenin Khuda ke Huzur Mein. He puts Lenin in front of Allah after dying, and Lenin is having this conversation, and Lenin is saying, I believe in you, and I know that you exist. And then, Lenin admits and says this line, Wo qawm ke faizan samavi se ho mahroom, hadus ke kamalat ki hai barko bukharat. That those people who don't have the faiz, who don't have that guidance from the divine, then they can only go as far as technology can take them. That's it. And then the next line, he says something which is actually very beautiful, profound. He says, "Hai dil ke liye maut mashinon ki hukumat, ehsaas murabbat ko kuchal dete hain alat." That the governance of machines kills the heart, and these devices and technology will destroy your human emotions. And if you look at research on technology and screen time, you see some of that right now. Dr. Rajab is not here, but he would love the Rooted Revival, title of this, right? Iqbal obviously was very grounded in his tradition. And like I said, he took from the efforts of others like Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi, who was also a revivalist in his time. And I was saying earlier that Iqbal initially said that Nietzsche could benefit from the guidance of Ahmed Sirhindi, Mujaddid al-Fisani, but then Iqbal visits the grave of Mujaddid al-Fisani, and he says, Hazir hua mein Sheikh Mujaddid ki lahad par. And this is such a beautiful poetry. He says, I presented myself to the grave of Mujaddid al-Fisani. Wo khak ke hai zere falak matlai anwar. That dirt that underneath the skies is like illumination of light. Us khak ke zarron se hai sharbinda sitare, us khak pe poshida. Wo sahib asrar. He's saying that it's the dirt that even puts the stars to shame. So he's taking guidance from people like Mujaddid al-Fisani. And that's, I think, something we have to understand as psychologists, that we can take guidance from these individuals and benefit from what they said. So he continued that legacy. And he says in his reconstruction of religious thought in Islam, he presents that intellectual and scientific progress in modern times was a manifestation of the Quranic spirit. Isn't something that's new. This is something what the Quran and Islam inspired us. Quran emphasized observation and experience. Quran said, look towards the sky, look around you, look within yourself, right? And that's when you'll find the answers. And that's where the scientific methodology comes from as well. He said that the concepts related to the rights of humans were derived from the Islamic tradition. So, we present now about Abu Zayd al-Balkhi and others. And last year at APA, I gave a presentation with Dr. Human and Dr. Khalid and Dr. Rania. And it was on the idea that it's injustice to the field of psychology if we don't include the work that was done by the Muslims, by the Arabs, right? Because the idea that somehow you go from these philosophers and then all the way to the 17th, 18th century, so for about 1800, 2000 years, nobody was thinking, like nobody was even putting anything in their mind and thinking. It's absolutely absurd for anyone to believe that. So we have to do that work, and we have to make sure we bring that to the light. Now, Iqbal came at a time where Muslims had lost their identity. This is Muslims in India. You had the fall of the Ottoman Empire here. You had the fall of the Mughal Empire in India. It's a very bad time for Muslims, right? They have lost their identity in this world. They're trying to reconcile so many different identities. Some people are saying, okay, at least we can pray. Iqbal answers to that. He says, Mullah ko jo hai Hind mein sajde ki ijazat, nadan ye samajhta hai ki Islam hai azad. Just because the mullah can have a sajda in India, he feels that he's free, that Islam is free now, right? So he's trying to say, no, your identity has been stolen and taken from you. And people are having difficulty recognizing their identity. So because of that lost status, he presented this idea of khudi, this idea that, we're one millah. This is a millah of Islamiyya. This is not just, I'm an Hindu I'm an Indian or Afghani. He challenges that. He said, you call yourself Afghani, you call yourself, Indian, but are you actually a Muslim? So the idea that we're part of one millah. And then when he presented this idea, almost 100 years after he did this, we're still talking about the idea of khudi, because the idea of khudis is a very universal concept, and it also comes from the teachings of Maulana Rumi. So a lot of people try to quantify khudi. It's very hard. It's very difficult because he presents a lot of this in his poetry, and poetry is very difficult to, explain, to conceptualize, right? He himself said, he used the word. He said, anyway, this is a letter that he wrote to Maharaja Kishan Prasad, who was the Prime Minister of Hyderabad in 1916. He said, whenever I have used the word, it is intended to mean essential personality, tashakhus-e-zati, or the feeling of ego, ihsas-e-nafs. This is the translation of the English word individuality. As far as I know, there is no such word in our language to express this concept, which one could use in poetry. So he knows that, and he knows those two words are also problematic. Because the tashakhus-e-zati can also mean identification by a caste system, right? Which was problem in India. So khudi is a very difficult one to translate. These lines are very famous lines of Allama Iqbal. He says, khudi ka sirr niha la ilaha illallah, that the utmost secret of khudi is that there is no one worthy of worship except Allah. And then khudi hai tegh fasa la ilaha illallah. Khudi is like a sword, and the thing that sharpens the sword is tawheed, is la ilaha illallah. And then he talks about like different idols that we have in this world. Ye mala dawlat dunya rishta ho pevan bhutan wahm guma la ilaha illallah. This wealth that we have, these relationships that we have, all of these are nothing but idols of our imagination, where the reality is there is no one worthy of worship except Allah. This was the definition that I presented in my paper that I published last year, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. The khudi is a life force innate within the human existence, striving towards the achievement of its primordial goal of reuniting with its ultimate creator, cultivated through self-reliance, self-respect, self-confidence, self-preservation, even self-assertion in the cause of truth, justice, duty, and morality. But again, this doesn't encompass the whole concept, right? So he uses it in a very practical manner. It's not just philosophical. So in this line he says, "Teri dua se qaza to badal nahi sakti, magar hai se mumkin ke tu badal jaye." That your duas cannot change your destiny, but it's possible that you making the duas will change you. And then he says, "Teri khudi mein ho agar inqilab paida, ajab nahi ki ye 400 badal jaye." That if your khudi, if you have this revolution that takes place inside of your own khudi, then don't be surprised if everything around you changes, right? The idea of make change within your own self. Now, people sometimes compare, I've read many papers of like this, his model of tarbiyat-e-khudi with, which is nurturance and the training of the soul or the self, to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I just talk about here how it's not. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is very materialistic based model. It's very reductionistic. It's very individualistic, biological based model. So there's really no comparison. And I think it's in Islamic spirituality, just to give you an example, according to Maslow's model, your basic needs have to be met. But we in Islam actually forego our basic needs because that helps us develop and self-actualize. So it's really not a good comparison. I'm going fast because I want to make sure I get through everything. But if you need any explanation, feel free to contact me later, right? I'm going to skip over this one. So, one of the things about this model that he has in his Farsi poetry, that, there's three marahil of the tarbiyah of khudi. Marhala awwal is ata'at, marhala dom is zabt al-nafs, marhala som is niyabat ilahi, right? And it's possible that he may have taken this from the hadith, which is a hadith al-Qudsi, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that whoever shows enmity to a wali of mine, I have declared a war against him. My servant does not draw near to me with anything more beloved to me than the obligations, the faraid. And then he continues with the nawafil, until I love him. And when I love him, I am his hearing with which he hears, his sight with which he sees, and his hand with which he strikes, and with his foot with which he walks. Were he to ask me of something, I would surely give it to him. And were he to seek refuge in me, I would surely grant him that refuge. Right? Iqbal says a person need to not look for God to discover himself, rather to look at himself to discover God. So the idea of going within yourself, developing yourself, and then through that development, you reach to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in his poetry, now this is in the early 1900s, so psychology is a new field. He even poses a challenge to psychologists. He says, "Jurrat hai to afkar ki duniya se guzar ja." If you can dare, go beyond the world of cognition and thought, because that's where the cognitive movement was coming around. "Hai behre khudi mein abhi poshida jazire, that there are many, many unexplored islands in the ocean of Khudi. खुलते नहीं इस कुल्ज़ में खामोशी की असरार जब तक तू इसे ज़रबे कलीमी सी न चीरे. That the secrets of this sea will not come out until you take the staff of Moses and you strike with it. What he's saying is you take what Allah has given you. You go down to what the Islam has given you. You use that to strike it. Then you can open the secrets. Because the Western models will fail you. Can only go to a certain level and cannot go beyond that. So in his model, he has three steps, like I said, ita'at, obedience, zabt nafs, self-control, and niyabat ilahi, which is being a na'ib of Allah or divine vicegerarcy, as you could say. Now, I think most people here, how many people here do not study psychology? Are not psychologists? Okay, so there are people that some don't. So we know in psychology and in Islamic tradition, there's a big attention that's given to tahdhib al-nafs, tahdhib al-akhlaq. That was psychology for us, right? So, like Imam Sulami has this idea of futuwa, which is a very good idea of futuwa. I'll give you an example of that. That happened to me this morning. I contacted Dr. Human and I said, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to take a cab from the Uskudar station to here. He said, don't take a cab, just take one of those Mardi carts. I've been using them. So I said, okay, fine. I mean, he knows the place. He's giving me mashwara with good intention. So I come up to the station and it says, you can't take the Mardi because this area doesn't allow it. So I said, okay, I'll go around because if I go around, it'll be closer. On the map, it looked like it was closer. So I went around, I parked, and then I look up and it's an uphill climb. And, it looks like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? So I'm walking up, and I'm feeling some anger towards Human as well. And so I messaged him and I said, did you know about this? He said, no, I had no idea. So I said, it's okay, because futuwa entails that I know he gave me good advice with good intention. So I can't be mad at him, right? So I expressed my frustration, but I wasn't angry with him. When I got here, I was extremely sweating. Like it was, I had to go to the washroom and wash myself, and it was, but the idea of futuwa or chivalry or this code of ethics, right? This is very commonly used, and not just in psychology or self-development. In all aspects, there's a futuwa name, as they would say, where like, you had one for carpenters, you have one for others, and one for others. Dr. Duba, how much time do I have? A lot of time? Just say a lot of time. Okay, a lot of time, okay. I know it's a video, right? I know, but I still want to play that video. So at the heart of this process is you have to put restraint on your nafs, right? We live in a world that is built on nafs. If you go to the West, it's all about the nafs, right? I mean, every year, I'll give you my example, because I don't want to like say about other people. Every year a new iPhone comes out and I go buy it. I don't need it. I do not need a new iPhone, right? My wife doesn't help either. She says, you don't buy anything. You don't buy clothes. You don't buy, it's the only thing that you buy every year. The only money you spend on yourself is the phone. Go get it. I'm like, no, you don't do that. You're supposed to stop me from doing this. But they do that every year. One year you have another camera, and then another year it's going to be another camera, right? And then one day it's all cameras in the back. Because that's what our nafs wants. It's like something new. It's got some new features. I want it. I don't need it, but I want it. The world is built on the idea of nafs. This is why they won't talk about nafs in the West. You will hardly see any like model that says control your desires. No, say stop to yourself and don't do it. In fact, do the opposite. You want to eat more chocolate? Then go fast. No Western model will ever tell you that, because they want you to eat more chocolate. You eat more chocolate, you get unhealthy. Well, guess what? Now you have to go to the doctor. So you're spending money. It's a capitalistic system. That's why it's progressing. But the heart of the work that we do with tarbiyah is that restraint, that control, and then the opposition, the mukhalafa and the mujahada. We have to do that. That's the work. And that's why Islamic psychology focuses on that. Right? So you put on some positive habits while learning to distinguish between what's good and bad. And then once you have their full rational capacities, then you can do that on your own self. So I can recognize that this is a nafsani issue. Inshallah, one day I can come to a point where I won't buy a new phone, that I'll have enough control on myself. Because the nafs inherently has certain qualities, right? We have certain drives that are inherent within ourselves. Imam Ghazali in Kimya Sa'adat, he said you have 4 types of qualities, right? We have qualities of hedonism, qualities of aggression, qualities of shaitan, qualities of malaika, the angel. And then Imam Ghazali also in his Ihya talks about this aggressive, predatory, ghadab, right? Or pleasure-seeking, shahwa. or in English, irascible or the concupiscent soul. This is part of your nafs, right? And some people say it's similar to the eros and thanatos, like Freud, Sheikh Freud, brought for us. But this is part of who we are, right? This is very natural to us, to want something new, to seek pleasure, to avoid pain. Not to mention, we also have external causes and sources, right? We have shaitans, wasawis, we have angelic ilhams. All of these things are producing. So we as human beings go through the three stages of the nafs, right? States of the nafs, rather. Nafs al-ammara, nafs al-lawama, nafs al-mutmainna. I'm sure everybody here has heard this before, right? And it's important to understand that these stages are, it's interesting. Nafs al-ammara is mentioned in Surah Yusuf, and Dr. Dareen was talking about using the prophets, right? I use the example of Yusuf alayhi salam very frequently with my clients because it's a very beautiful story. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ هَمَّتْ بِهِ وَهَمَّ بِهَا لَوْلَا أَرَّى بُرْهَانَ رَبِّي. Right? Something loosely translated. She approached him, and he would have approached her had he not seen the signs or the guidance. Meaning, if he didn't have the divine guidance, the natural tendency of a man is to respond to a woman. You see what I mean? That's a very natural. That's a prophet. We're talking about the best of the creation, right? So, and then in that same story, there's a mention of a nafs al-ammara, inna nafs al-ammaratun bisu, right? That's what nafs al-ammara does. So we recognize that it's very natural, normal for us to have these tendency, but we have to have control. And we switch from, now you're doing me damage. We switch from one side to the other. So that's the nafs, okay? So Iqbal, he has a very similar concept of nafs than other shuyukh. He compares it to the animals. Like he says, a camel, a she-camel, he uses that analogy. Some people have used a donkey, a horse, a dog. This picture is from the Mujaddidi path. This is the Naqshbandi Mujaddidi path and Nasruddin and his donkey, right? So Nasruddin, in this first picture down here, he's in the market and he's like walking around. He doesn't know what's happening. But he's looking for his donkey. So now as he's looking for his donkey, number two, he's beginning to deal with his ego self. Then he finds the footprints of his donkey, right? So there's a little bit of like that awareness that comes in. Okay, number four, he finally finds the donkey, right? He's aware of his nafs, and now he's going to start toward the path towards Allah. But when he makes that path, number five, the donkey resists, says, no, I don't want to go. I want to stay here, right? Don't move me. But he keeps pushing. Now number six, he finally has full control. Now the donkey is walking with him without any resistance. Number seven, even better, he's riding the donkey, right? Now his nafs is taking him towards Allah. Ya ayyatuhan nafs mutma'inna, irji'i ila rabbik, right? He's coming to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with his donkey. And then in number eight, this is a very completely empty picture because there's a complete separation, what Sufis might call fana, right? And then in number nine, now he's coming back, what Sufis might call baqa. And he comes back to the same market in number 10, but now he has that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So this is not like we're completely destroying, we're not saying leave everything and go into the mountains, but rather bring yourself to that. So what does Iqbal do? In his first step, he's talking about obedience. He mentions qualities like service, toil, patience, perseverance, having less energy, less eating, less sleep, less noise, being ecstatic about it, being determined. I'm going to say some Farsi poetry. If somebody speaks Farsi, please forgive me for that. But he has this idea of being constant motion, right? He gives a story. He says, "Sahili uftade guft garche basi zistam, hichna malum shud ahke man chistam." He says, one time a shoreline was sitting and thinking like, what is my purpose? I exist here, but what am I supposed to do, right? And then what happens? Mojza khud rafta hi tiz kharami do guft, hastama gar mirawam gar narawam nistam. He says, a wave comes, thrashes into it, and says, I exist because I keep moving. I'm in motion. If I don't move, nistam, I'd cease to exist. Right? So Iqbal is saying you got to keep doing, keep working. That leads to ikhtiyar, because now you're making the choices. So that ita'at is done. Then you go to the nafs. And he mentions that the nafs has four essential qualities. Right? He says, nafsetu mista shutar, khud parwarast, khud parasto, khud sawara, khud sarast. That there's four qualities that the nafs has. It's self-growing, egotistic, self-conceited, self-worshipped, self-governed, and stubborn and rebellious. So you're going to encounter that donkey resisting. right? And then he says this is the nafs where it feeds on the fear and love, right? He says, let's see what he says. طرح تعميرة أزغل ريختند با محبت خوف را آمیختند خوف دنیا خوف عقبة خوف جان خوف أعلام زمین و آسمان حب مال و دولت و حب وطن حب خوش و أقربا و حب زن. These are the fears and the loves that the nafs will feed on. But controlling the nafs is important. There's another line that I use in clinical psychology. He says in the same poetry, he says, "Har ke bar khud nist farmanish rawan, me chud farma phazir az digaran." That those who cannot say no to themselves, they always say yes to other people. People struggle with assertiveness. They say, my wife or my brother says this, my boss says, I just say yes. If you can't say no to your nafs, you get used to saying, you become a yes man. You always say yes to other people. And then he goes into the third level, which is niyabat ilahi. Once you overcome before that, he talks about how to overcome the nafs. He says, you have something simple. Your 5 pillars of Islam that are simple in how to make your life easier. And so he talks about how each of them then destroys the qualities of the nafs and how bring them closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, I won't go into that, but he mentions that. And then lastly, he says that then you become the vicegerent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This paper is published, by the way. You can read all about it. Email me if you're not sure. Then you become the naib of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'll read the one paragraph from my paper and I'll conclude with that. He says, to the man, he says, the person who's the naib of Allah, he's the final cause of Allama al-asma. God taught Adam the names of all things. He's the inmost sense of glory be to him. Subhanallah asra bi-abdi. Like he is the inmost sense. His hand splits the river. His anger dries the Nile. His brings life to the dead hearts. His very existence is the evidence for the existence of the universe. Interpersonal qualities include being a mentor, for example. He adorns the world with his presence. His thoughts and awareness are universal. He's the life of this world, strengthens the nature from every deficiency. He's always conscious of God and his place in this world as a representative naib of God. He says that a dirt, you see, this is a beautiful thing. He says Rasulullah did Mi'raj. When Rasulullah was an insan, right? So he says a piece of dirt was able to meet with its creator. Now a deputy will emerge from the mere dust. He asked us to stand up, spread love, care peace. He says, mankind are the cornfield and you are the harvest. You are the goal of life's caravan. No'i insan mazra'atu hasili, karawan zindagi ra manzili. I'll end with that. Jazakumullah khair.
Okay. Thank you so much. I would like to personally thank for your excellent presentation. I really learned a lot. Thank you so much. So we will move to our next speaker. Unfortunately, she's not here, so we will. Yeah. Okay. So just a little bit, I will introduce her. Haniya Khan. Uh, Haniya Khan, she's a homeschooling mother of 3, which is for me is very good to see. I'm also mother of 1, it's very hard. And a psychologist, a researcher, and educator. She's a jogger by choice and who keeps herself sane by seeking the balance. And she registered with the Saudi Commission for Health Specialties, a degree in psychology, and advanced training and certification in the field of mental health. She has developed expertise in research methodology, clinical assessments, and therapy, but is still looking forward to learn more. Her life work is to facilitate the revival of the ulum al-nafs, Islamic psychology, and to create bit-sized self-help material and tools from it, with the assistance of like-minded people, and to equip women, especially mothers and homemakers, to get psychologically resilient and strength to most basic unit of the society, the family. So now we will watch the video. Okay.
Part of being brown is that I'm also IT.
على رسوله الكريم أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
So turn up the sound in the. Okay, I'll switch back to you. That's fine.
And today we'll be having a talk on conceptualization of anger by Imam Abu Zaid al-Balkhi. In his book Sustenance of Soul, which is the second part of the book Sustenance of Bodies and Soul, Masalih al-Abdan wal-Anfus. And this book is translated by our beloved Professor Malik Badri, rahimahullah. So I'm quite amazed at this single chapter that we'll be discussing on how to counteract anger and get rid of it. So this single chapter is having only 2,000 words, written in 200 in Hijri, like only 2 centuries, like later than the time of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then just 200 years before Imam Ghazali's work, which is in around 400 Hijri, and 12 centuries back than today's time. So before we continue, let's have a quick checklist.
She's having IT problems, but I'm not there, so I can't help her. Yeah, I think she has it's a full video, so she'll eventually figure it out. There you go.
So let's have a few moments of this silent, quick self-check. All right. So clarity first. We are not here to look for some new school of thought, since Freudism, with all its focus on unconscious will and desires failed, and then behaviorism with its deterministic and reductionist approach based on solely stimulus-based response failed, and it like dehumanized human being to an extent by classifying them as animals. And in book by Malik Badri on contemplation, he quotes his words in which Watson says, human beings do not want to class themselves with other animals. They're willing to admit that they're animals, but something else in addition. It is the something else that causes the trouble. In this something else is bound up everything that is classed as religion, the year after, morals, love of children, parents, country, and the like. So we're here because we share a firm belief that our Quran and Sunnah has given us comprehensive solutions to all our modern day problems. And the literature that has been derived from Quran and Sunnah with contemplation and sincerity has got a comprehensive solution and a comprehensive model to almost everything which needs to be revived. And whether it fits into the scientific or the empirical cast of today's psychology or not. And we are here since we believe there is no healing and no nurturing without the concept of the soul. So it is actually the interaction of the body and the soul and its interdependence on each other, which is termed as ishtibak by al-Balkhi. So it's like whenever the soul is whenever soul lacks of nurturing, it has an impact on the body. And likewise, if the body is not nurtured well, for instance, like if it's not feed with halal and tayyib and with something else, it's going to have an impact on the soul. So within this framework of Ishtabak, we'll be trying to see how anger is explained and by Al-Balkhi, and how does he like gives us the ways to tackle it. So according to him, it is actually the disorder of the soul which agitates the soul, and it shares the same source um, from where huzn, sadness arises. So they both have this same source, which is distress. So avoiding any distress or being mindful of distressful events and or just being more thoughtful of them and trying your best to manage them can actually help one to not go through these emotions, or it's inevitable to avoid them completely, but still like to have them like in excessive amounts, etc. And then this anger to in our uh, like Islamic context, we actually think that anger can be positive and negative in nature. So we shouldn't be getting rid of it like altogether, but it needs to be channelized. So if we did not have positive anger, let's say, we would not have like ghira, which is like a valuable value in our like men and in our culture, in our society. So this emotion, so we'll be seeing in the next slides how this emotion can be channelized by the rational and spiritual cognitive therapy, I would say, suggested by Imam Balkhi. But before that, let's see what contemporary CBT has for us. So the contemporary CBT like mainly would use these strategies to combat anger, like so it has got deep breathing, mindfulness, PMR, progressive muscle relaxation exercising, and then we have cognitive restructuring, which is like the most important, or I would say the efficient. Evidence-based practice, uh, which has not only worked with anger well, but with all other problems as well. And then problem solving, where actually so the difference that we can the difference that we see between problem solving and cognitive restructuring is that cognitive restructuring focuses more on the internal mechanism, like our own perception and attitude towards the problem. But in problem solving, we try to fix the problem itself. So it's like, I am, let's say, having problems with my boss. So instead of like cognitive restructuring would tell me, not to personalize it and to, have positive thoughts replaced with negative ones about my boss, etc., etc. But in problem solving, we'll try to fix the boss, which is like the so this is like a long-term solution. Cognitive restructuring actually gives us long-term solutions, and whereas problem solving gives us leads us to like quick fixes, which is needed at times, but in long term, like it's not a solution for almost like everything. And then we have got behavioral rehearsals or role plays where actually one can be a client is taught to imagine himself in a role of the offender, etc., and then vice versa, etc. And then comes the assertive communication. So this is my favorite one, where the power struggle comes, and so the way we get communicated and we communicate with people uh, is an indicator of how we do not want to be controlled and how we want to control the people. So practicing like more positive ways of communications helps us to have So, in his book, Al-Balkhi mentions some of the external means of anger management, but here we'll be seeing the internal self-treatment approach, which is based on the mental management of thoughts, which are consciously like repeated to oneself to counteract the thoughts arised by anger. So the first one is nipping in the bud, which is like counteracting the anger the moment it arises and reminding oneself more or less or somewhat it's somewhat similar to what we call behavioral rehearsal in CBT, in which we take advantage of the moments of relaxation and tranquility and convince ourselves that yes, we are in control of this emotion, and this is an emotion which can be resisted, and with repeated exercise, it becomes a habit, which is done in behavioral activation also. It's and behavior is rehearsed enough times until it becomes a habit and gets activated when it's needed in situations. And then the second mental attempt is to contemplate the bodily disorders that can be caused by anger. So if a person, according to Al-Balkhi, like in the state of anger, if a person observes and get mindful of the physical sensation that he's having in his body, like rising temperature or trembling or redness of face and changes in heartbeat, etc. So all of these can help him to accept the fact that it is going to cause him more harm than he would inflict on any other person. So this is what we do in psychoeducation these days. If a person, if a client is able to understand the consequences and the impact of one's behavior, it helps them to regulate that behavior or the emotion. The third one is to reflect on the intense feelings of guilt and remorse in case if there's an anger outburst, and since then there would be no option of doing any remedy to the situation, and this would result in a guilt which is going to cause them have episodes or flashbacks of the situations and causing greater guilt, and with guilt come the feelings of remorse and um, etc. So creating like a vicious cycle in which he's trapped. And this one of the vicious cycle that I remember from behavioral activation is almost similar, where the guilt gives rise to negative feelings, and then these negative feelings results in avoidance, and this avoidance then reinforces the feelings of guilt and sadness and so on. So to break this cycle and not to get stuck into this cycle, it's being suggested by him to remind oneself of the consequences that one can have by having emotional outbursts. And then this is like one of the most beautiful phrases of the books, the thinking soul. So he suggests us to remind oneself or the thinking soul of the great virtues of patience and forgiveness. Sorry for the wrong spellings. Anyways, and reminding oneself of the models of inspiration upon the onset of anger. Like whenever one gets angry, they remind themselves of how virtue and how forgiving people have been valued in our Quran and Sunnah, and in the eyes of Allah, and Allah Himself is forgiving. So this would help them to have a better control on better control on their anger. So the fifth anger management technique is delaying the emotional response. So according to Balkhi, this is helpful in two ways. First of all, he'll get to attain the attributes of patience and forgiveness, and then he'd be more successful in changing the behavior towards uh, the offender. And so we know, like, whenever we are whenever we are very, very angry and having like an emotional, intense outburst of anger, the amygdala gets activated and all our executive functions stop. We have like our these animalistic behaviors coming out, like yelling. We yell, we shout, we hit, etc. So delaying the emotional response helps the amygdala to shrink back to its original position, and when it returns to its executive functions, only then it is able to ponder and reflect and be rational towards what he's doing. The sixth is unpersonalization and empathy. So Al-Balkhi tells us to concentrate on the negative feelings towards the wrong deed and not the doer. So, which is like one of the cognitive distortions, unpersonalization of things, and then empathizing with them. The seventh one is to avoid immediate encounter and let time heal the stored emotions. So the same thing as we said, it takes when the response is paused or when it's delayed, and our brain gets back to its normal functioning, it's better able to respond more. So this management technique is about the realization and reminding oneself of the fact that quick, severe anger outburst can actually harm the warmth and the intimacy of the relationship that the superior has with its subordinate. And so it's going to be bitter, it's going to be full of resentment and fear, and the submission or the obedience can happen right away, but it would be temporary in nature and it would be external. And since it would be external, we cannot expect them to stay obedient or stay compliant or to stay compliant or to stay submissive in the long run. But instead, if this is done and if obedience is asked for with love, with forgiveness, with mercy, with kindness, then it's going to be internal in nature. And it's going to be submission out of love. And this is how it can be sustainable in long term. And so this power struggle and that we see here is present everywhere. We can see this everywhere, like from our family units, like from parent-kid relationship to husband-wife relationship to boss-employee. We're having these problems almost everywhere. And the more we try to control it, or the more we try to exercise our power, the more things get worse at both the ends. So this is actually my favorite mental, I would say, technique, since it reminds me of parenting with kindness. It reminds me of the fact that if I am in a more powerful position than my kid, then how am I going to, like, what am I supposed to do? And how I'm going to act, and how important it is for me to control my anger and not let my anger outbursts define the way I am communicating with my kid and I'm handling them. So we all like quick fixes, yes, if I would yell and if I would scream and shout, that would result like in immediate, fix all over. Like I can get things cleaned up and everything in place, etc., etc. But in long term, that wouldn't be internal in nature. That would be external. So when there is no screaming and yelling and anger and mama, all the things are going to be back. So this is the difference between long-term management and quick fixes, which Al-Balkhi tells us like way ahead than our contemporary psychology. And also like CBT also focuses more on cognitive restructuring than problem solving, because the external means can never get out of place. They can be different in different phases of life, but they can never get out of your way. So cognitive restructuring is much better option. But my question here is, let's say if someone in his belief system, I would say active belief system, does not have the clarity and conviction on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being al-Qadir, the powerful, Rab, the Lord, and Adil, the just. So how do you think cognitive restructuring, the contemporary cognitive restructuring, is going to help with his problems that arises from anger and power struggle and uh, wanting to control and exercise power? Do you think like without accessing and restoring the belief system of that person around Allah being the powerful, which who has the ultimate power, and then he's the one who has actually decided to distribute this power in different amounts to different people according to the positions, etc. And then he is actually the Rab, and no one else is. So if I'm trying to raise my kids in the capacity of Rab and not in the capacity of a human being or the limited capacity that Allah has given us, I'll be ultimately miserable, and I'll ultimately be trying to gain more and more control and fail miserably, and then be at the same place and never grow. So, uh, with this, with all these techniques being ended, the takeaways for us is that the difference in active belief system or the worldview that we have and that of the Western psychology have is very different and have very few intersecting, like the name of the conference is very beautiful, the intersection of Islamic studies and contemporary psychology, because the intersection is at very quite low places, and that is also not I would say we need more than that. We need, yes, we do appreciate and we do accept the phases where we both meet and the places where we both meet, Islamic psychology and the contemporary psychology. But we do have enough material that can help us with the revival of Islamic psychology. If this work has been done in the second century, second Hijri, and 200 Hijri, yes, 12 centuries back, and then Al-Ghazali has done his work like 400 centuries in 400 Hijri. That means like we have enough of in what happened in between. We just need more exploration, and we just need to dig out more and be more sincere. And I and you, with all our credentials and experience, we cannot make anything out of Islamic psychology or ilm al-nafs. We can never nurture our practices like as a therapist or as a healer unless and until we have got the right, sincere intention. And this is the only way to get the hikmah and the barakah. Like the reason we all would agree now, like these 200 words like are more heavier than any ordinary, I would say, course taken in bachelor's or graduate studies, like a whole semester thing. And it clearly surpasses like years of empirical research on anger management. So the reason that we take our inspiration from, like, Malik Badri and his books, like his few books, which are like countable on fingers, are inspiration for all of us. And it's not only helping us as professionals, but also like lay people that I know. And it's just because they had a sound conviction on revival of Islamic psychology, and this is what led them to hikmah, and this is what led their work to have barakah in it, and that's the barakah that we all are collecting today, here and always. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Jazak khair.
Okay, I'm also thank her, Hania Khan for her presentation. Now floor is open for Q&A section. So, is there any question, comment, and yes, please.
Can I ask it to you? Okay. The model introduced, I was wondering, is it a treatment model like CBT? So you start at one and progress gradually until the eighth step, or just can you pick?
I would email them.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, another question? I think everything is very clear. They want lunch, yeah. Yeah, I think so. So we have announcement about the lunch.
Yeah, now we have a lunch break for 1 hour, and after that we will continue with our presentations here at İSAR as well, like parallel talks, and you can just check on your brochures as well. Now we have a lunch break.
Okay, thank you so much for participating and for your presentation again. Shall I see you in the next session?
Pardon.